Hey everyone, how's it going? So, back into Nehemiah. Nehemiah 4. As I've said previously, I really feel like Nehemiah is like the book for Leadership 101. Nehemiah 4 is where the work is ridiculed and there's a lot of discouragement that's being thrown at Nehemiah and the Jews. So it talks about Sanballat and Tobiah. So they hear that the work is starting and is succeeding. It's like, we can't have this. So they start mocking him, causing all these problems. And so then Nehemiah notices, he's like, oh, the people are getting really discouraged. This is not good. So he does this prayer where he's like, hey, God, you need to see what they're doing. They're discouraging the people. Like, you need to hold this against them. Hold them accountable for this. So, side note, that would make me feel like discouragement, to discourage someone in this sense, right? They're going after their goal. God has given them this this malicious discouragement. It's evil. It's a sin. Okay, watch your mouth. All of us, watch my mouth. Okay, but so they start saying in at verse 2, can they finish it in a day? Can they revive the stones from the heaps of rubble? Even the burned one, if a fox were to jump on it, it would just all fall down. So they say, hear, O God, how we are an object of contempt. Return their tauntings on their own heads and turn them into plunder in a land of captivity. They're like, let it happen to them. We're a little angry. But do not forgive their guilt and do not let their sins be wiped out before you, for they have demoralized the builders. So it's like, hey, God, recognize what they're doing. Don't just turn a blind eye to this. And so they continue to build, and it just keeps going on and on. So Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, so everybody from around them, okay, not the Jews, but those surrounding them, hear about this. And they were angry, of course, because then that means that the Jewish community, Israel, is getting a walled city. And if they have a walled city, they can be prosperous. Okay? So all of them conspired, this is in verse 8, to come to fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. So I think this is very key here. With discouragement like this comes a spirit of confusion. You don't know what's right. Did you really hear God's voice? Did you not? I'm confused. I feel discouraged, okay? So, first step, Nehemiah goes, but we pray to our God. And because of them, we set up a guard against them day and night. Now, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? But we need to do the same thing. This is the first step. We pray to God. We're like, okay, God, what's going on here? And you set up a guard against your mind and your heart. And not against God, but against this discouragement, and against this Do you really know God? Did God really say that? Where did we first hear that? In the garden, right? We know God's voice. It's always, we're always learning, we're always going deeper. But we know God's voice. And so they were still really discouraged. And so the Nehemiah Leadership 101, he gathers the elders together. And he gathers the people. And he says, okay, everybody's discouraged. We need to regroup. And when they regroup, he reminds them of what God has done for them. Okay? So he says, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and who fights for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Okay? So he's like, we pray to God. We remember what God's done for us. We remember who God is. And in doing that, we remember who we are. But we still put feet to our faith. And this is the chapter that talks about every man had both a weapon and a tool. Okay? So if he wasn't working, he was guarding. And that's the other thing, right? So when we get discouraged, or it's like we put down our tools and we put down our weapons, and we can sit there and become, like navel gazers and like, woe is me. And it's like, no, you need to keep going. You need to still have your purpose. And it says that when our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plans. So they realized they're just trying to discourage us, and God gave them that wisdom, that knowledge, that this is just the enemy frustrating you. You need to, of course, guard yourself, because you haven't built up the correct walls, but you're working on it. So you need to guard yourself on this. And that discourages the enemy. The enemy's like, we'll find a different way to do this now, right? And from that day on, half of my servants carried on the work, while half of them kept the spears, the shields, the bows, the coats of mails, and the captains behind all the house of Judah. Those who were rebuilding the wall and those who carried burdens carried with one hand doing the work and the other hand holding the weapon. As for the builders, each wore his sword strapped to his waist as he built. Now, when we fast forward to the New Testament, what is it? It's the sword of truth, or the belt of truth, right? And the sword of the word. Okay, so this is what we need when we're feeling discouraged. We go back to the sword that the Lord has given us, and we gird our loins, because in order to hold that sword, we need the belt of truth. Where do we get the truth? We get it from the word. Okay. And then so they carried on, and none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon, even to water. So they were vigilant in what they were doing. They didn't become lackadaisical in their work. And it's not, sometimes when we think about not being lackadaisical, we think about striving. This isn't striving. This became part of the routine. I would recommend changing your clothes, because when I read this, I think they were probably very stinky, right? But it's that same idea where Paul says to pray constantly, right? So even when they were doing mundane things like going to get water, they still had their weapons in their hands. Don't put down your weapons just because you're doing something mundane, right? We are spirit beings. We're supposed to always be connected. And this is how we stay from getting discouraged. We keep on track, and we keep focused on who he is and who we are in him. All right, that's what I got out of Nehemiah 4 today. All right, have a good day, guys. See you.